Everyone, I'm Allie. Join me in creating this Sphinx necklace featuring some Potomac Crystal Rivolis and some Tila beads. This is based on the simple Tila Rivoli bezel and then notched up a little bit, adding in some different sizes and then some fun connection points. Make sure to watch the whole way till the end where I show how to make those connection points stand out even more. Remember, if you need any materials, go ahead and look below the video in the description to shop with us online. So to start this beautiful design, we are going to be utilizing 18mm and 14mm Rivolis, along with some Miyuki Tila beads and Miyuki 11.0 and 15.0 seed beads. You can choose how many you want to do for this necklace, and the Sphinx necklace can be short, it can be long, you could just do the centerpiece, lots of variety and variations that can be done. I'm going to begin with my gold Tilas for my 18mm, and then my silver Tilas will be for my 14mm. They're going to start out the same way creating the design, but my 18mm, we're going to start with 8 of our Tila beads, and my 14mm are going to start with 7 of my Tila beads. So this is a variation on the simple Tila bezel piece. I have some size 6 Dragonthread along with a big eye needle, and then again 15s and 11s in the Miyuki silver color. To begin, I'm holding the bottom of my thread, and I'm going to add 1 of my Tilas followed by 1 of my 15.0 seed beads. I'm going to continue that for a total of 8 times to get my simple bezel for the back of the design. So after each Tila goes a 15.0, and you continue to build. When you're using a 14mm, we are starting out the exact same way, but instead of 8, we are using 7. There's one slight modification in the step, and I'll show that when we get to the 14mm. So 8 are going on. And I'm making sure, because I started with a Tila bead, that I'm ending with a 15.0 because I want the 15.0s between each. We're now going to bring this out to a rounded circle. I'm going to tie it into a loop. If you want to and you're a fan of a stop bead, you can use a stop bead here, but honestly the loop works great because it gets that center section nice and tight. So you see I'm pulling with a decent amount of force, getting that into that nice circled section. From here, I know that I ended with a 15.0, so I'm going to sew through the next Tila bead, through the first hole, or that interior hole that we're working with. Bring my thread and needle through there. And then I'm going to step up, so I'm going through the second hole of that Tila bead. Now comes step number 2, where I'm going to circle the whole way around the piece, adding in 2 11.0 seed beads. So I'm going to pick up 1 and 2 11.0s this time, and I'm going to catch the second hole of all of my Tila beads. So on go the 2 beads and through. You're going the whole way around, adding 2 beads at a time as you catch on to the second hole of the exterior Tila. As you're finishing up going around that whole exterior row with your 2 seed beads, you'll notice I also went through that first Tila that my thread was coming out of, as well as the first 2 seed beads that I added. So I'm coming out of those first 2 seed beads, and now what we're going to do is increase our count of our seed beads. So we started out with 1 15.0 between each in the center. We're increasing to 2 between each. And now instead of going through the Tilas, we're going to catch on to those 2 seed beads that we just added, adding 3 more 11.0 seed beads in the mix. So 3 seed beads get added, and then you can see I'm sewing right there between those 2 beads. Needle and thread goes through, and bend those beads towards the front of the design. We're going to end up creating our little bezel here, and it's almost going to make a bowl shape as we go in, pulling the thread and adding those 3 seed beads. So see how that's turning the Tila, so it's a little bit on an angle. Continue around, adding 3 seed beads, sewing through the next 2. 3 seed beads through the next 2, and so on, till we're back to our starting side. As you finish up the design, you are going to have your last 3 seed beads that you're adding. And you can see I've pulled them all towards the center of the piece. It almost looks like a little framed window. And we're going to drop our 18mm Rivoli into place. It's just going to hang out in the center there as we go around and add our next step. Here's where there's going to be a difference between the 18 and the 14 millimeter Rivoli. I'm going to step up through the first 3 seed beads that I added on this last rotation, and I'm going to sew back through all of those 3 seed beads, but I'm going to add 2 11-0 seed beads between each. So 2 seed beads get added, and then I'm sewing through my next 3 beads. 2 seed beads get added through the next 2 beads, and I'm using the 11 still. When I get to the 14 millimeter, instead of 2 beads getting added here, I'm just going to add 1. So I'm circling the whole way around, adding those 2 beads, which are going to force that Rivoli to sit down a little bit. And those beads then we're going to catch onto and add in some 15-0s as we circle around again. So once again, just 2 beads go on, and then you're sewing through the 3 you just added that sit right in front of the Tila bead. After you add all of those groupings of 2, I'm sewing back through that first group of 3 that my thread was coming out of, and then I'm going to step up through the first 2 seed beads that I just added and completed from this last row. So your needle and thread are going to come out through those 2 seed beads. What I'm going to do now is just pull the bezel a little bit tighter. If you're using 11-0s, you're going to use 2 of those. I'm using 15-0s, and I'm going to use 4 15-0s. So 4 15-0s are going to go onto my needle, and then I'm going to skip over to the next set of 2 that I just added in the last row. Once again, go ahead and add 4 of your 15s, and then through the next set of 2. I'm going to do this the whole way around, bringing those 15s in towards the center to really grab on to this 18 millimeter Rivoli. After adding in the last 4 seed beads here, you're going to be sewing back through that first set of 2 that you were originally coming out of. Bend all those seed beads towards the front, give a nice little tight yank, and then I'm going to sew back through some of those beads that I just added. When doing a bezel, when you're holding a bead in with seed beads, it's always a great idea to take an extra piece of thread the whole way around that interior bezel, as well as doubling the thread at the exterior or the back of the design. So you're just going to go through, reinforce the thread, pulling it a little bit tighter as you go in and sew through all of these beads that you just added, including sewing through the 2 millimeter, or the 2 11s rather. If you do want to, you can also add 2 15s right there and sew over there. Once you're around the whole design, you're going to go step back through the 2 seed beads that your thread was originally coming out of. Then you're going to step back through the group of 3 seed beads. Then you're going to step back through the group of 2 seed beads. So you're just going on a diagonal, and right there also I'm ready to go through my second hole of my Tila bead. I'm going to bring my thread and needle the whole way to the back of the design, flipping it over. I'm going to go from the outer hole of this Tila bead to the inner hole of that same Tila bead. From there, I'm going to take my needle and thread and sew around the whole interior of the back of the bezel till I get my threads to match. Once I get my threads in the same place, I'm going to tie the threads together, the starter thread and the ending thread, and that finishes off the 18 millimeter. I'm going to be utilizing the 14 millimeter Rivolis to attach the 18s together. So the 14s will sit between the 18 millimeter, and we're going to use those to go in and to create our little links in our connection. So first things first, go ahead and bezel all of your 18 millimeter beads. I'm going to be doing 5 of those 18 millimeter for my design and 6 of my 14 millimeter. So start off with all of your 18 millimeter, finishing up those 5, and then we'll start on the 14s and I'll show you how we're going to attach them together. So as you're finishing up with your 18 millimeter and you have again that grouping of 7 beads or 8 beads, you're going to start your 14s with 7. So I have 7 of my Tila beads in there, tied my knot. I know that in this one I started with a seed bead again, so I'm going to go through my next one of my Tila beads and once again step up. We're going to continue this same exact pattern, stepping up, and then once again adding 2 beads. When I'm using the silver of my Tila beads, I'm going to be using gold. I'm using the galvanized champagne, that Duracoat galvanized champagne, and doing once again 2 around to get that nice center row. When you're in this step of the design and you're going from the 18 millimeter, where after we went through our grouping of 3 beads here, you're adding 2 seed beads at a time. With our 14 millimeter, we are going to only add 1 of our seed beads at a time. So between my grouping of 3 here, in my sample piece, I did 2 of my 11-0s for that 18 millimeter. For the other one here, I'm going to end up putting 1 11-0. So 1 11-0 goes on, and then I sew through the next grouping of 3. Once again, 1 11-0 goes on through the next grouping of 3. And this is going to pull that bezel nice and tight. And then just like we did on our larger piece as well, once we go around and we put this all in and we pull that nice and tight, we are going to be adding 4 of our 15 millimeter seed, or our 15-0 seed beads between each one of our seed bead here that we entered. So going around, I'm going to go ahead and do 7 total of my 1 single seed bead, catching on to those groups of 3. So just like the 18 millimeter Rivoli now, instead of going through and having those 2 seed beads that I'm connecting onto, I'm just going through and connecting to 1, grabbing 4 of my 15-0s. And then once I have those 4 on my needle, sewing through the 1 singular seed bead. Once again, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then sewing through that 1 single seed bead. So we're going to do that the whole way around. And then what I'm going to show you is how we are going to connect our 18 millimeter Rivolis with our 14 millimeter and what the pattern is for that connection spot. So I'm going to be using my 14 millimeter to connect all of my 18 millimeter Rivolis. Coming out through one of my Tila beads, I'm coming out through that first hole of the Tila. For the first one, it doesn't matter how you're connecting, but after that, you want to make sure that you're connecting the same way. So I'm going to show the connection point here. We use a Tila in the middle, and then I have some seed beads leading up to it, done with a square or a ladder stitch. And I'm making sure when I'm attaching to my 14 millimeter that I'm attaching to that odd count of my Tila bead. For the 18 millimeter, we have 8 beads. So you'll notice on the back, you're connecting right to the 2 Tila beads that sit across from one another. When you're connecting to the 14 millimeter, you're going to want 2 empty Tilas at the top, 3 empty Tilas at the bottom. So when I'm connecting, I want to make sure as I'm doing the connection that I am connecting currently to the same one. This side I'm going to connect to my last 18. And then when I go in to connect to the next 18, I'll make sure that I'm hanging out at the right one of my Tila beads. Coming out that Tila bead at the top hole, I'm going to add a series of 4 of my 15-0 seed beads. Once those 4 15-0s are on, I'm going to go in and I'm going to create this connection point. Sorry, 5 15-0s. I'm going to create my connection point. I'm going back into that same hole of that Tila bead. And where I'm going in is the thread is coming out here at the bottom. I'm going into the top, which is going to set those 5 beads right along the side. Back up through those 5 15s. Give a nice tight pull. And that square stitches this together. At the connection point, I'm going to run my thread and needle through one more time. Coming out through that 15 then, give a nice tight pull on your thread. I'm going to go from 15s to 11s, and I'm going to pick up 4 of my 11-0 seed beads in my silver color. Coming out of the top of those 15s, I'm going to go into the bottom. Then once again, back through those 4 11s that I just added. From here in the middle, I'm going to grab another one of my gold Tila beads. Sew through the first hole here, and then once again back through those 4 11-0 seed beads. So I'm sewing around in a circle. Make sure that sits nice and tight. Go back into that first hole of your Tila bead. Coming out the first hole of the Tila, grab 1, 2, 3 11-0s. in your silver color and go back through the second hole, the empty hole in that Tila bead. That's going to create a little pyramid or a little picot trim on the sides of our Tila beads. And then once again, grab 3 more of your 11s. So back into the first hole of that Tila bead. From here, I'm going to skip over the bead, so the thread's going to go underneath, or you can sew through them. And I'm going back to the second hole, like I need to progress through my Tila bead. That's halfway. From here, I'm going to shorten up my thread tail in my big eye needle, and then I'm going to downgrade. So once again, 1, 2, 3, and let's see if we have a fourth one here. I'm going to need to get out 1 more of my 11 O's in the silver. Oh, one hiding right there. And then I'm going to sew again into the top of that Tila, down through the Tila, and have that lay right beside. 4 beads go back through that needle, give a nice tight pull. From here, once again, 5 beads go on in the 15 gold, that beautiful champagne color, up through the top, around, and down. Give a nice tight pull, making sure you don't see any extra thread. Now here's where I'm going to attach it to the last one here, looking at my last connection point, and I want to make sure that it lines up and that I'm connecting to the right space. So I'm going straight across to the side. I want my Rivoli to sit face up, and I'm going into the Tila bead that sits directly across from the previous one. Once again, I'm going to take my thread and needle through the 15, up through all of them, down through the Tila bead again. You can see that I have a little bit of thread showing, a lot of thread showing. I'm going to tighten that up. Go back through them, those last 15s, and that tightens that up. Now what I'm going to do, because I have the next one to go through, is I'm going to reinforce my thread, zigzagging back through that whole design, taking my thread and needle from the Tila here, through the 2 beads, Tila, 2 beads, Tila, 2 beads, and then out through that Tila, so I have 2 empty ones along the top. Then I'll get ready to do the same technique and attach the next one of my 18mm Rivolis. Once you're to one end of the piece, I'm going to be adding a clasp closure, and I'm using the 14mm Rivoli Potomac's clasp because then I can take another one of this beautiful color shift Sphinx and use that as my clasp. So coming out of the end of my piece here, I did my Tilas and my seed beads. I'm going to grab onto my thread and needle 1 and 2 and 3 beads, 2 15s and 1 11/0 seed bead. Take your needle and thread then, go up through the clasp, go back through that 11/0 seed bead, pull that down towards your piece, add 2 more seed beads, and then sew back through that last group of 5 beads. Now we're going to obviously reinforce this. So we're going to go back up through all of those beads that I just added, getting that nice little triangle. So we're going to go through the 2, then we're going to go through the 1, through the clasp. And I'm going to do this 3 times to get a nice foundation of thread through there. If you want to use a wire guard, you can use a wire guard as well. I just want my clasp to look like one more piece of the puzzle, so I'm keeping it rather close to the piece rather than extending it further away. And then coming back down through the piece. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side of the necklace and finish up by gluing that Rivoli into place. As I'm finishing up the piece, I have extra thread. And what I'm using this for is I'm using this to reinforce these connection points and also make that picot trim a lot more pointed. How I'm doing that is I'm going back through the design, just going around the outer edge. And as I get to the center spots, I'm going in and going back down through my beads, back through those 5, back through the 4, back through the Tila. And then when I come out through the Tila bead, I'm going back through bead number 1 of that grouping of 3 seed bead picot trim that's on the top, skipping over bead number 2 and going through bead number 3. What this is going to do automatically is pull beads number 1 and 2 closer, or 1 and 3 closer, and pop number 2 up. Go down through the Tila. Same deal on the other side. Go back through bead number 1. Skip over bead number 2. So no second strand of thread goes bead 2. Go back over then bead 3 and back through the Tila. Once you do that again, look, ready, pull tight. It forces that middle bead to pop up. Skipping over the Tila then to the other side of it. Just pulling that thread towards the back of the piece here. And then once again, continuing down the line of seed beads. When you get to the Rivolis, you're just going to sew around that outer edge. Going in here. And I'm going to sew through 2 Tila, 2 Tila, 2 Tila, 2 Tila, and then continue on with the rest of the piece, tightening that up and adding that nice pointed trim. Once you're all finished with the piece, the last thing to do is pretty much to burn off any thread ends along the back that you may see. And then once again, I'm just going to grab some E6000 glue and glue in another one of my 14mm Rivolis. My necklace ended up being right about 16.5 inches long. And again, I used a total of 6 of my 14mm Rivolis, and then I used 5 of my 18mm. Thanks so much for joining me in the creation of this Sphinx necklace. Remember, if you need any materials, look below the video in the description to shop with us online. You can also make tons of variations and make it into a bracelet, a necklace, or even just that connection area, making that into a simple wrap bracelet. Remember, if you want to, you can subscribe to this YouTube channel so you don't miss anything from us here at Potomac Beads. Thanks so much for watching, and stay tuned for the next inspirational video.